So at this point, I'd like to open it up. And it's along those same themes of what matters to you most. What are the things that you need to have here in Clarksburg? Thank you very much. And what school are you at? That's right, Clarksburg Coyotes. You see that? Love it. Thank you very much for that. And it's absolutely true. You know, that's interesting because I hear the same thing in some of the other areas that I represent, namely Olney, to where we have a growing population of teenagers that are looking for things to do. And we all know, you know, being the father of 3 children, one of them that goes to BCC, I can tell you that it's very important for us to make sure that, especially when our children are reaching out to us and telling us that they want constructive things for us to do, to make sure that we're delivering on that. So thank you for that. We have marked that down, and we will make sure that as a part of that town center concept, those are the things that we incorporate into it, because I think it's extremely important. There are proposals that have been put out to various companies, Giant, Safeway, Wegmans, Harris Teeter, whatever the case may be. But those proposals might not have necessarily been as profitable to those companies as they could be. And part of that, I think, might be based on the person who's putting out those RFPs to those companies. They might be able to do a little bit of a better job in terms of reaching out to them and attracting them. So I don't think that it's necessarily the companies themselves that are proving to be the challenge. It might be the people that are accepting the RFPs are the ones. Again, if you can read between the lines there, I'm trying to guide you in a certain direction in terms of where I think the challenge might be. But that's one of the things that we're going to look at in terms of trying to exert some pressure, because you're absolutely right. If the grocery store gets built, things start to fall in place. There's no question at all. And unfortunately, it's not something that we have direct control over, but we can start trying to elicit some pressure on those folks to understand that that's what's holding things up. Well, I think that essentially wraps around what I mentioned before about the Elcourt property. You bring up, again, that's a very valid question, looking at what we can do as far as the ComSat property goes as a linchpin for Clarksburg, an opportunity for us to develop in that area. And it might be, you know, the Fillmore is wrapped up in some development, but also in incentives. And it might be the same sort of thing that we look at with the ComSat property in terms of incentivizing a large employer to come to Clarksburg to be that linchpin. So, I mean, you bring up a very valid point. Obviously, we have to have proposals before us to start making those kinds of things, but that's where I'm talking about the relationship between us and working with our business community, working with Steve Silverman with the Department of Business and Economic Development, with our brand new Business Development Council. And that will be one of the things that I actually touch base with them on, because those are the new folks that are supposed to be the brain trust for establishing where we go as a county. And I think that that's a great opportunity for them to start wrapping their heads around something that we can do with that property in this area here in Clarksburg and put some investment dollars behind it. So I'm all supportive of that, you know, with having the right proposal and making sure that we have dollars behind it to incentivize it if necessary. So I do support that. I think that it's important for us as we move forward as a society to try and restrict as many barriers as possible. You know, when I think to my mother who grew up in rural South Carolina, one of 14 brothers and sisters who dealt with racial inequality and then also dealt with sex inequality as a young woman, it's important for us that we try and restrict as many barriers as possible. Life is too hard. You know, and if a person decides that they want to be with someone, I'm not the person to decide that. And I'm deeply rooted in faith, and if people need to be able to make the decisions that they're going to make, and if they need to answer to a higher power, I'm not that person. So just wanted to leave it at that. The question dealt with making sure that we had school infrastructure, understanding the needs of Clarksburg, the number of portables that are here, and a number of the schools, and then also dealing with our SRO program, correct? Okay. Unfortunately, I've had a chance to look at the governor's upcoming budget. And while he retains full funding for GCEI, which is the Geographic Cost of Education Index, which means where it's more expensive to teach children, which is in Montgomery County. We have a higher cost of living, and just general things around education are more expensive. You give more money to it. And so we benefit from that, and that's great. In fact, I think that as a county, we might end up somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million more in terms of an increase, which is primarily in school aid. That's the good news. The bad news is that when it comes to school construction dollars, we're basically flat. And so while we've seen over the previous years that we've had huge increases in school construction, we're not going to see that for a while. And that affects not only schools here in Clarksburg, but also in Germantown, where I live, where my daughter is in elementary school and is one of 1,000 students in an elementary school, one of the largest in the state. So I hear you. And we've just got to continue to advocate, and in my role, not only on the education committee here on the council, but also in my relationships in Annapolis. I have fought against portables for a long time. I feel as though the health risks and also the social stigma that goes along with portables are a challenge. And don't support them in that right, and would love to see us start really developing the types of schools that can actually handle the capacity of our communities. So I'll say that. Then, so that's going to be an ongoing process in working in tandem with the state. When it comes to SROs, amen. Our SRO program is something that I think is a jewel that unfortunately, because of budget cuts, we decided to minimize. We fortunately, as part of the recent savings plan, did save the existing SROs that we have, but I would be a proponent of looking at ways in which we can expand the program, and we are currently actually working on that for this year's budget. So more to come on that. I can't say any more than that right now, but we actually have a proposal that we are working on currently that will be proposed for this current budget that will encompass us making sure that we bring SROs to each and every school like they were before. Excellent. Thank you. The question was making sure that we had things for seniors to do, that our seniors programs, we all know, just got cut as a part of the fiscal savings plan proposed by the county executive, ratified by the council. And that was tough. And I actually met with Gabe Alvarez, who's in charge of Department of Recreation, and we talked about that as well as a number of other issues as far as their cuts and how they were trying to mitigate through those. And it was interesting because I just went to Germantown Recreation Center, where they also have a senior program, and ran into a couple of my constituents. And they certainly had a few words for me when it came to talking to them about the senior program. You know, these decisions that we're making as far as budget, and I didn't want to talk too much about budget because part of it is separate from some of the Clarksburg issues, but I did want to say this. You know, we are faced with some extremely tough challenges in terms of prioritizing, making sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable, while being true to our core mission and vision for where we want to be as a county. And it's difficult when you don't have money to be as great as you used to be. And that's the challenge that we find ourselves in. We did a lot of great things. I'm born and raised in this county. I've seen it. We've done so many fantastic things that separate ourselves not only from any other county in the state, but from many other counties in the nation. And that's phenomenal. But the challenge is then when we don't have the money, what happens? And I think that that's when we run into those problems where we start having to prioritize. And you know, who's to say that the senior program is less important than kids after school programs, is less important than volunteer firefighters, is less important than schools and and teachers, and you know, you run down the list and you start